I shot up in bed, heart hammering like I'd just sprinted miles, my breath catching in my throat. The sound that woke me wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't some distorted echo from a dream. It was clear and real, my baby crying. Not just any cry. Ariel's cry. The one I knew down to the bone. The one that stirred something primal in me, every time without fail. A high-pitched sob, sharp at the start, then tumbling into little whimpers like broken music. I didn't hesitate. I flung the sheets back and ran. My bare feet slapped the wooden floor as I moved on instinct through the hallway. The house was dark, quiet and still. But that sound, it didn't come from memory. It came from her room. Her door was closed, just like I'd left it 6 months ago. My hand hovered over the knob. My chest heaved, but I wasn't tired. I was terrified. I hadn't opened that door since the morning I carried her out for the last time. I had cleaned nothing, changed nothing. Her crib, her nightlight, her stuffed animals, everything was right where she left it. Frozen in time, like I thought keeping it all exactly the same might keep me from falling apart entirely. But the sound was inside, and I had to open that door. My fingers twisted the knob, slowly, quietly, like I was afraid of waking something I already knew was gone. The room was dark, but the soft blue glow of the nightlight still cast shadows across the walls. I stepped inside, breath shallow, body stiff. And then I saw it. The crib was empty. Not just empty. Cold. Her pink blanket was folded neatly at the foot, untouched. The little mobile above the crib hung still. There was no sign of anyone, no sign of anything. The crying had stopped. My legs buckled, and I dropped to my knees. I pressed my palms to the floor like it might anchor me, like the wood beneath me could carry the weight that my heart couldn't. I whispered her name. Ariel. No answer. My eyes scanned every inch of that room. Her rocking chair sat quietly in the corner. Her stuffed animals lined the shelves. Moosey, the teddy bear she used to hold so tightly in her sleep, was gone. The crib was empty, but the teddy bear was missing. And that's when I felt it. Not a sound, not a voice, a presence. Like the air behind me shifted. Warmer. Closer. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and I turned. And there she was. Ariel. She stood in the middle of the room, one hand at her side, the other clutching Moosey. Her eyes, those soft brown eyes I used to stare into for hours, looked straight at me. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't floating. She was just standing. Just as I remembered her. Same polka dot onesie with the small tear on the sleeve. Her curls were tied up like I used to do every night after her bath. Her cheeks were pink like she'd just woken from a nap. I didn't move. My whole body locked, frozen between fear and awe. My heart screamed, but my mouth couldn't speak. And then she smiled. It was small, quiet, but it was her. It was Ariel's smile. Every part of me shattered and came back together at the same time. I wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to cry out and ask how this could be happening. But I didn't, because in that moment, nothing else mattered. She was here, and I was breathing. Before that night, I had learned how to live with silence. Not the kind that feels peaceful or calm, the kind that hangs in the air, heavy and sharp like a scream caught in your throat. After Ariel died, the world didn't stop, but everything in me did. I existed in slow motion while life outside the walls of my home kept moving, as if nothing had changed. Most mornings, I woke up before the sun. Not because I wanted to, but because sleep had become a stranger. My mind didn't allow rest. I'd lie in bed watching the ceiling change shades as dawn crept in. On some days, I stared long enough to wonder if my heart had stopped beating altogether, because the grief made everything numb. But it hadn't. It just beat quietly, like it was afraid to feel anything too deeply. I lived in a small house outside of Duluth, Minnesota. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a modest kitchen with faded tile I'd always planned to redo someday. It was the kind of place people called cozy, and for a while, it was. Ariel made it feel like a home. Every inch of it was full of her. Drawings taped to the fridge, bibs I never put away, her tiny socks still tucked into the laundry basket like she might need them again. After the funeral, I stopped answering the door. People came with food, flowers, kind words. I couldn't accept any of it. I didn't want casseroles or cards. I wanted my daughter back. Eventually, they stopped coming. I didn't blame them. Grief makes people uncomfortable, especially when it doesn't follow a schedule. I had been alone for months. My ex-husband Brian had left long before Ariel passed. He said parenting was too much for him, and when she was born, he barely looked at her. I used to think I hated him for that, but now I envied him. He didn't have to carry this kind of weight. He had the luxury of moving on without looking back. Every day felt like I was walking through water with bricks tied to my ankles. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't remember what it felt like to laugh and mean it. People online told me to try journaling, praying, meditating. I tried all three. None of it filled the hollow that losing her left behind. I hadn't gone back to work either. I used to be a preschool teacher. The thought of being around children again made my stomach turn. I couldn't look at another toddler without seeing Ariel's face, her voice, the way she used to hold her arms up to be carried. I could still hear her saying "Mama" when she wanted to be rocked at night. I didn't know if I would ever be able to hear another child laugh without breaking apart. And yet, I kept the nursery exactly how it was. The room still smelled faintly of baby powder and lavender lotion. Her crib stood beneath the window, neatly made, with her pink blanket folded at the foot. The mobile above it had tiny clouds that spun when the wind came through the vent. I never turned it on, but I never took it down either. Her bookshelf still held her favorite board books, all worn at the corners from the way she chewed on them. I had convinced myself that preserving her space would keep her alive in some way, that maybe, by not changing anything, I could anchor her memory in something solid. But over time, the room became more like a shrine. I avoided it most days. I'd walk past with my eyes fixed on the hallway wall, pretending not to notice the closed door. I couldn't bear the thought of opening it and feeling nothing. Or worse, feeling everything. I didn't speak her name aloud anymore. It hurt too much. It felt like calling out to someone who couldn't answer. Sometimes, in the shower, I whispered it just to hear the sound, just to remind myself that she had existed outside of my dreams. The grief was a tide I learned to survive, not swim in, not fight, just float when I could, sink when I had to. I measured my days by how many hours I could go without crying. Some days were better than others. Most weren't. The few people who remained in my life, my neighbor Carol, a woman in her 60s who brought me groceries every Sunday, tried to pull me out of the fog. She would say things like, "Julia, sweetie, you've got to let her rest." But I didn't know what that meant. Ariel was the only part of my life that ever felt whole. Letting her rest felt like letting go of the only real thing I'd ever had. I didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't believe in signs. I believed in pain, in absence, in the way silence can wrap around you until it feels like a second skin. But on that night, when I heard her cry again, something shifted. For the first time in 6 months, the silence broke, and everything I thought I understood about grief, about love, about death, changed in an instant. That night, I had fallen asleep on the couch again. The bedroom felt too far away, too empty. I remember the sound of the television humming low in the background. Some old documentary was playing, but I wasn't watching it. I was just lying there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the hours to pass like I always did. I remember pulling the old quilt around me, more for comfort than warmth, and closing my eyes, not really expecting rest. Then I heard her. It was sharp at first, like a single high-pitched note cutting through the dark. I opened my eyes immediately. The house was still. I stayed frozen for a second, not breathing, not blinking, unsure if I had really heard anything at all. Then it came again. Cry. My baby's cry. I knew that sound. Every mother knows the sound of her child's voice. I didn't need to think. My body moved before my brain did. I pushed the blanket off and ran. The hallway was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. My hands trembled, but I didn't stop. When I reached the nursery door, I stood there and waited. My hand hovered inches from the knob. I told myself it wasn't real. I whispered that maybe it was the television. Maybe the house was settling. Maybe my mind had created the noise because I needed to hear it. But deep down, I knew better. I opened the door. The room looked exactly as it always did. Moonlight poured through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. The mobile above her crib spun gently, even though the air felt completely still. The crib was untouched, her blanket folded, the sheets smooth, empty. But something was wrong. Moosey was missing. That bear had never left the crib. It was the only thing I buried my face into when she died. I had pressed it against my chest at the funeral. I had held it on nights I couldn't stop shaking. I never moved it from that spot, and now it was gone. The crying had stopped, but I felt like I was still hearing it inside my head, like a ghost of a sound that wouldn't fade. I stepped into the room, slowly. The hardwood was ice under my feet. I looked at the rocker by the window, still. Her bookshelf, undisturbed, her baby monitor still plugged in on the shelf, blinked with a faint red light even though it had been dead for months. I whispered her name, not in a loud, commanding way. I said it like a secret I wasn't sure I had permission to speak aloud. Ariel! That's when I heard it, a soft creak behind me. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't move. My skin prickled with the feeling that I wasn't alone. I turned slowly, half expecting to see the door swinging, or maybe Carol, my neighbor, standing there confused. But it wasn't either of those things. I saw something small in the hallway, a shadow. It moved quickly, like a child slipping out of view. My legs locked in place. My chest ached from how tightly I was holding in my breath. I called out again, louder this time. Ariel? Nothing. I stepped back into the hallway. It was dark, but I could still see. The nightlight in the hallway cast a glow that flickered like a candle. I walked toward it. My eyes scanned the edges of the walls, the doors, the floor. Then I saw the bear, Moosey, sitting at the top of the stairs. My throat tightened. My body stopped moving. I hadn't touched that bear in weeks. It had been sealed inside the crib. The windows were shut. No draft, no explanation. But there it was, upright, clean, untouched. I walked toward it, picked it up slowly, and held it against my chest. It still smelled faintly of the lavender detergent I used when she was alive. My knees gave out, and I sat on the top step, clutching it like it was all I had left in the world. I looked behind me. The hallway was still empty. No footsteps, no sounds. But the crying had been real. My hands were shaking. My skin felt ice cold. I buried my face into the bear's fur and rocked slightly, just like I used to do with her in the middle of the night when she wouldn't sleep. My heart raced, and a voice in my head screamed at me to do something, to call someone, to explain what just happened. Who would I tell? That I heard my dead daughter crying in the night, that her teddy bear moved from her crib to the hallway on its own, that a shadow the size of a toddler darted past me and vanished? I knew what they would say. Grief plays tricks. Minds bend under pressure. Mothers hear things they want to hear, but I didn't want to hear that cry. I didn't want to feel this again. I didn't want to be reminded. I had learned to live with the pain by locking it away. Yet that night it all came rushing back. The sounds, the smells, the sense that I wasn't alone in my own home. I sat on the stairs until the sun rose, clutching Moosey and waiting for something, anything to explain itself. By the time the sun rose, the entire house felt different. Not brighter, not warmer, but still, somehow changed. I hadn't moved from the top of the stairs. My arms were wrapped around Moosey, and the stiffness in my back told me I'd been sitting there longer than I realized. Light spilled through the living room windows, touching the edge of the hallway like it was afraid to come any further. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Even as morning noises returned, the rustle of wind outside, the hum of the fridge, I didn't feel like I was back in the real world yet. It was as if part of the night had followed me into the daylight. I sat there and kept asking myself one question over and over. What do I do now? I had lived in numb silence for so long that I forgot what it felt like to move towards something instead of away from it. But last night had torn a hole in everything I thought I understood about grief, memory, and reality. Ariel's cry hadn't come from inside my head. That bear didn't move itself. And the feeling in that hallway, something watching, something waiting, it wasn't grief. It was something else. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff and weak beneath me. I didn't go to the kitchen. I didn't check my phone. I walked straight back to the nursery. I hadn't stepped into that room in daylight in months. The morning sun lit the curtains from behind, casting soft light onto the crib. Everything looked untouched, silent. but I felt like the room was holding its breath. I opened the closet door and pulled down the memory box from the top shelf. Inside were all the things I couldn't bear to throw away. Her hospital bracelet, the first pair of socks she wore, the letter I wrote to her before she was born. There were pictures, a lock of her baby hair, and the last ultrasound where she looked like she was already smiling. I sat down cross-legged on the floor and placed Moosey in front of me. I didn't talk to the bear like it was magical. I didn't pretend this was a movie. I simply said her name, Arielle, just once, just to see if it felt real again, and it did. Something in me cracked open. I started talking, not to a ghost, not to the room, just into the air like I was pouring out all the words that had been trapped inside for 6 months. I don't know what happened last night. I don't know if you're trying to tell me something or if I'm finally breaking, but I heard you, I felt you, and I can't pretend that I didn't. The words came faster. They burned coming out, but they didn't stop. I tried so hard to keep everything the same because I didn't know how to keep going without you. But I think I froze everything, so I wouldn't have to feel it, so I wouldn't have to say goodbye. I wasn't ready. I'm still not. I picked up Moosey and held it against my chest. The smell of her lotion was faint, but it was still there, a piece of her, a reminder. And then I made a decision. I was going to stop avoiding the truth of what I had seen, what I had felt. Whether it was supernatural or psychological didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what it meant. Something inside me was trying to come to the surface. Something needed to be faced, and I wasn't going to run from it again. I cleaned the nursery that afternoon, not in a way that erased her, but in a way that honored her. I folded the clothes and placed them in a chest. I sorted her books into a box I labeled for the future. I took down the mobile gently and tucked it away with care. It was painful. Every item felt like a goodbye, but I kept going. Later that evening, I opened the blinds and let the sunset fill the room. I brought in the rocking chair from the living room and placed it by the window where I used to sit with her in the evenings. I held Moosey in my lap and just sat there, breathing. I didn't expect anything to happen. I didn't wait for shadows or voices or another cry in the night. I just sat and allowed myself to feel her presence without fear. That night, I lit a single candle on the windowsill. I said her name out loud, not in sorrow, but in recognition. I told her the truth. I miss you, but I'm not going to hide anymore. There was no voice, no whisper in response, but something in my chest loosened. A pressure I had been carrying for months lifted, even if only slightly. For the first time in half a year, I wasn't waiting for the grief to drown me. I had chosen to face it. And whatever had pulled Arielle to me last night, memory, spirit, or love, had opened a door I hadn't been willing to touch before. Now, I was ready to walk through it. That night, something changed again. After the sun went down, I sat in the nursery just like I had the night before. The candle flickered on the windowsill. Moosey was in my lap. The room smelled like lavender and old memories, but the air didn't feel as heavy. I wrapped myself in one of Arielle's old blankets, the soft one with the clouds and stars on it, and I rocked gently in the chair, not expecting anything but silence. Then the temperature in the room dropped, not sharply, but in a way that made my skin tense and my breath catch. The hairs on my arms stood up. The candle didn't move, but I felt the change before I saw it. A soft light shimmered near the crib, faint at first, like a reflection from the street outside, but there was no car, no sound. The air was still. The glow grew brighter, and I sat up, completely alert, heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to move, but couldn't. I wanted to speak, but didn't know what to say. And then she was there, Arielle, standing just a few feet away, barefoot on the wooden floor, clutching Moosey to her chest. She looked exactly as I remembered her. Same round cheeks, same tiny curls sticking out at odd angles, same sleepy eyes that always lit up when I entered the room. She wore her polka dot onesie, the one with the little yellow duck stitched on the collar. Her face was calm, but there was something deeper in her eyes. A knowing. A softness that felt older than her years, like she wasn't just my baby anymore, like she had seen something I hadn't. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't ask if I was dreaming. I knew I wasn't. This wasn't a nightmare or a vision. It was something else. Something outside of what I could explain, but rooted in everything I felt. She looked at me and smiled. My body leaned forward, instinct taking over. My hands reached out, and for a moment, I thought I would touch her. I thought I could lift her into my arms and feel her weight again, but she shook her head just slightly and took one small step back. Her lips moved. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I heard her clearly. "Mommy, you forgot to say goodbye." The words hit like a stone thrown through a window. My chest cracked open. I covered my mouth and lowered my head, fighting the rush of guilt, of sorrow, of everything I had locked away since the morning I found her gone. "I didn't mean to," I said. "I wasn't ready. I couldn't." She nodded. "I know," she said, "but I came back so you could." I stood slowly, not taking my eyes off her. My legs were shaking, but I made it to the center of the room, where the light around her glowed brightest. She didn't move. She just looked at me, her small fingers still gripping the bear. "I miss you every second," I said. "Every part of me hurts without you." "I'm not gone," she said. "You just can't see me like before." The room pulsed with warmth then, a stillness that didn't feel cold or hollow but peaceful, like the world had paused to make space for something sacred. Ariel walked to the crib and gently placed Moosey inside. She turned back to me and smiled again, softer this time, like she knew this was goodbye, but also not the end. "I have to go," she said. "You have to stay." I fell to my knees, unable to hold myself upright. My hands pressed against the floor as I tried to steady my breath. My tears didn't burn. They released. They cleansed. "I love you," I whispered. She walked toward me, leaned close, and touched her forehead to mine. I closed my eyes, and in that moment, everything around me disappeared. The pain, the silence, the ache. All of it melted into the warmth of her touch. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. The light had faded. The air was still again. The candle burned steady on the windowsill. Moosey lay neatly in the crib just as she left him. But the room was not the same. It didn't feel haunted. It didn't feel broken. It felt full. Not with noise, not with ghosts, but with something real, something whole. For the first time since losing her, I didn't feel like I was chasing a memory. I felt like I had touched the truth, and it had touched me back. I stayed there on the floor for a long time, letting the tears come without fear, without shame. And when they finally stopped, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the kind you read about in books, not the kind people try to sell you with platitudes. The kind that comes from facing the deepest pain and still standing. The kind that whispers, "You made it through." Ariel came back to give me that. She came back so I could finally let her rest, and so I could finally begin to live again. The next morning, the world looked different. Not because the trees were greener or the sky was clearer, but because something inside me had shifted. I woke up on the nursery floor, wrapped in Ariel's blanket. The candle had burned itself out sometime during the night, leaving a faint line of wax on the windowsill. Moosey sat quietly in the crib, just where she had placed him. I didn't feel startled. I didn't feel fear. I felt quiet. That was the first thing I noticed, a quiet that didn't scream or ache. It was calm. Still. I stood up, stretched, and looked around the room. The nursery no longer felt frozen in time. It didn't feel like a shrine or a prison. It felt like what it was always meant to be, a place filled with love. I left the door open when I stepped out. For 6 months, I had closed that door like sealing off the past would protect me from breaking. But now I understood that grief doesn't live in locked rooms or untouched furniture. It lives inside the heart, in the memories, in the way someone's presence lingers after they're gone. I made coffee that morning. I poured it into a mug with Ariel's handprint on it, one we had made at a pottery studio months before she passed. I used to keep it in the cabinet, out of sight. I couldn't look at it without shaking. But that morning, I held it with steady hands. I opened the window in the kitchen. The air smelled like spring. My neighbor Carol walked by as she did every morning, and instead of pretending not to see her, I waved. She looked surprised, but she waved back, her smile wide and warm. It had been a long time since I let anyone see me as something other than broken. Later that afternoon, I gathered the things I had tucked away in Ariel's memory box. The pictures, the bracelet, the letter. I sat on the living room floor and read every word of that letter again. I had written it the week before she was born. I told her how excited I was to meet her, how scared, how ready. I cried, but the tears didn't crush me. I spent the rest of the week rearranging the nursery. I moved the crib to the side wall and replaced it with a reading nook. I brought in a small desk and set up a corner where I could write. Not because I wanted to forget Ariel, but because I wanted to let her memory live inside something new. I didn't want her to be a moment I ran from. I wanted her to be the reason I moved forward. I started attending a support group for mothers who had lost children. I listened to their stories, their pain, their small victories. At first, I didn't speak. I just sat and absorbed the weight of their words. But then, one evening, I raised my hand. I told them everything, about the cry in the night, about Moosey, about Ariel's voice, about how she told me I forgot to say goodbye. No one looked at me like I was crazy. No one questioned what I saw. They just nodded, and some of them cried. Because whether or not they had experienced what I did, they understood what it meant to need one last moment, to need closure that doesn't always come the way we expect. In time, I returned to the preschool where I used to work. I was afraid at first, afraid that being around children would undo all the progress I had made. But it didn't. It reminded me of why I loved what I did. It reminded me of Ariel's joy, her curiosity, her laughter. One afternoon, a little girl with wild brown curls came up to me and placed a drawing in my lap. It was of a woman and a baby, holding hands beneath a sun with a face. The girl smiled and said, "That's you and your baby. She visits you, right?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I just nodded. Children see things that adults forget how to believe. That night, I sat in the nursery again. Not to wait, not to wish, but to feel. I held Moosey in my hands and closed my eyes. I didn't hear her cry, I didn't see her shadow, but I felt her. Not like before. Not like a presence in the room, but like a soft strength inside me. She wasn't gone. She had simply gone ahead. I whispered her name, not in sorrow, but in gratitude. Ariel. She was the beginning of me. And in some way, even in her short life, she taught me more than I could ever put into words. I don't know why she came back that night. Maybe it was my breaking point. Maybe it was her way of healing what I couldn't fix on my own. But I believe now that love doesn't vanish when a heartbeat stops. It lingers. It carries us. And sometimes it shows up when we least expect it, asking not for tears, but for goodbye. The kind of goodbye that makes space for something new. I will always miss her. I will always carry her. But now I can carry her without falling apart. She came back not to haunt me, but to let me live again. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of someone you've loved and lost, then you're not alone. Grief doesn't disappear. But sometimes, when we're quiet enough to listen, love finds a way back to us in the most unexpected moments. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story meant something to you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts or your own story. This space is for all of us. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and filled with meaning, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment. Until next time, take care of your heart. You never know who might still be listening.